Hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you back, and it's so nice, at least myself, if you joined us last week, it's so nice to not be doing this rather awkwardly from a hotel in central London. Today, I'm actually at home. Hopefully, the quality all round will be improved for it, and unlike last time, you can see my lovely ears, which were hidden behind those horrible headphones last week. By contrast, you don't get to see Rowan's lovely ears. How are you, Rowan? Can't
I'm
believe you're
doing.
denying me your lovely ears.
I'm doing very well. These are very good headphones. They're very comfortable. I don't want to take them off.
Fair enough. We can. Everyone will just have to imagine for themselves the majesty of Rowan's ears. Um, oh, what a treat when they finally come out one day, perhaps. Um,
No, thank you.
so. So today we're going to be talking about admissions testing, particularly focusing on test strategies and thinking about how you can improve your chances, improve your marks, improve your performance through a few little tips. And then we'll be taking some questions at the end. I think this is going to be a relatively swift set of slides. We should have time for plenty of questions before we disappear at around 3 o'clock. So as I mentioned, did I mention? I don't know. In any case, whether I mentioned it or not, my name is Matt. I look after the research team here at UniAdmissions. So my job is to make sure that everything that we put out there in terms of resources, in terms of strategies, in terms of ideas, all the things that we recommend to make sure they all work. This is a particularly exciting time of year for me. Because we're really closing in on the bit where we can really feel the impact of those marginal gains and really tell if things are beginning to work. It's always so exciting to see how students have progressed from earlier in the year to now, and the student boarding now to see how much of a difference it can make for them at this crucial stage. Someone who's been helping on board and get hold of and all those sorts of things, all these lovely new students, is Rowan. Rowan, how have things been going in your part of the organisation lately?
Busy, as you can imagine. We're getting lots of students coming to us lately, just obviously looking to get help and support with their application, which is what we provide. As an admissions consultant here, I obviously speak to people who are interested in what we do. I can obviously tell you more about how we do, like how we help students and everything. And we also can give general advice and just generally help out with your application.
Fab. So, as I mentioned earlier, today we're talking about improving test scores. Next week, we're going to be coming back to the personal statement, looking at some final bits and pieces for that. But I think Rohan has some other ideas as well. So we'll see how that comes out when we come round to it. So today, to sort of chop this up into themes, we're first going to be thinking about how much admissions tests matter. If you've joined us earlier in the year for any of these, some of this material will be familiar. We'll be talking about test strategy, and we'll also be talking about the specific support we offer as an organisation, which is, what we're really proud to be able to do, to be able to recommend things that work and to do that in a structured way. So the first thing to say is that the admissions tests are more or less the most important single part of the application. This is an extract from the Oxford Admissions Handbook, which is the text used internally by admissions tutors to make sure they're doing the interviews and the rest of the application process correctly. And when they come to rank things, they're putting the admissions test at the top and they're putting the personal statement at the bottom. Now, my experience is this comes as a surprise to a lot of students who are expecting the personal statement to have a lot more weight than it does, at least here. And that's why I think it is so important to understand the value of the admissions test, because it's not something that people are necessarily aware of, but also to understand why that is. And the first reason for that is because of the way that exam scores have developed over the past couple of years. Because of the pandemic, not just A-level grades have been going up, although they did come down this year, but they still haven't come down to the 2019 levels of success. Things are, I think, roughly back around the 2020 level this year, and then the hope is to get it back down to the 2019 level. And we see a similar pattern with GCSEs as well as with A-levels, where because of the unique circumstances of COVID, students have been getting higher marks. There's been a more generous regime in terms of marking. And that has meant that the information provided by the test scores, that is to say, the information given by the A-level results in terms of ranking students, isn't as reliable or as high quality as it used to be from the standpoint of the universities. So this has led us as an organization to really reassess the way in which we think about the sort of balance of the different elements of the application, which brings us to the pie chart, which I hope Rowan was expecting.
You gave me the slides earlier.
So if I hand that over to you.
Lovely. So this pie chart is a very important bit of info just to know exactly what you should be focusing on with your application. So it's split into 4 separate parts, as you can see here. So in blue, we have, it's labeled as GCSEs. I end up just calling it the academic background. So it's things like what school you went to, what your predicted grades are, GCSEs. And that actually adds up to, it's about roughly 10% of the application. Then there's your personal statement, which is about another sort of 10%. And then it's really your admissions test and how you do on that in your interview, which are both 40% each. That really dictates, obviously, is the major factor whether you get the obviously get in or not get an admission. And while your grades and your personal statement more help you get your foot in the door, you still need those to be good to obviously be able to show off with your test results and then the interview as well to really help your application.
Yes, that's spot on, Rowan. And the thing, as you say there, to remember about the interview is because you only get to the interview after the admissions test, you can almost think of the admissions test as encompassing that piece of the interview, because the interview only matters if you get one, right? Mm-hmm. You know, you don't, if you're thinking of the relative importance of different dates, the first date is the most important date, because if the first date is bad, you don't normally get to go on the second date.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing to obviously keep in mind as well is with things like the interview is very often they won't really give you that much that much in a way of letting you know whether you have the interview or not. They don't give you a lot of time to really prepare if you've got, so you can't really wait until, oh, you've got the interview, I'm going to start prepping for that. You really got to prep for it as if you will get the interview just in case.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had students who've come to us in the past with, 10 days notice. And while there are things we can do to help in 10 days, there are inevitably only so many things you can do in 10 days, because that is not very long. Not very long at all. So the way to think of all of this is, I like to try and put the positive spin on this, which is to say, even now, nearly at the end of September, you still have an enormous amount of control and influence over how you do in this process. Your performance in the admissions test in 3 or 4 weeks' time is more important than the GCSEs that you've done. So if those GCSEs weren't perfect, then you have the chance to redeem yourself. And if those GCSEs were really good, there's something you're really proud of, then you've already built a really firm foundation that you can build on. And particularly at this stage where you've got 3 or 4 weeks before that test, using your energy in a really intelligent, targeted way can make a really enormous difference. If you are working smarter than the other applicants, then you don't need to work harder, is the way I like to think of it. Unfortunately, Oxford and Cambridge have never been more competitive than they are now. Offer rates have been falling for the past decade or so. But again, this is driven by the number of places having stayed relatively stable while the number of applications has gone up. That doesn't necessarily mean that the average quality of application has gone up. So the rewards to having a smart strategy are even greater than they would have been in the past, because you are dealing with a higher level of competition, but there are also sort of definitionally a larger number of mediocre students who you can overcome with a little bit of strategy. Mm-hmm. So just to look at that graphically, you can see that the offer rate has come down by about 5 percentage points for both Oxford and Cambridge. So where previously you would have had something like a 1 in 4 shot, you're now looking at more like a 1 in 5 shot in the case of Cambridge, and a symmetrical change for Oxford. I've never taken the time to sort of regress these back too much further, but my worry is that I'm going to end up really upset because I didn't get into Oxford in 2008. And if that graph holds, perhaps it was really easy back then and I was really thick, which I don't want to think about. God, no. We mentioned the admissions tests up front. Almost every subject at Oxford or Cambridge will have an admissions tests. We have a very informative set of articles, a set of resources about all of this sort of thing available on the website. If you speak to Rowan or one of their colleagues, they'll be able to absolutely fill in everything you need to know on the subject. And these are, I believe this year, most of them are a couple of weeks after the UCAS deadline, but they're a little bit earlier than normal, right?
I personally haven't been made aware of any changes, but you may be correct in that.
It'll be one I'll double check so we can talk about it later.
Yes.
And in the case of Cambridge, there's a mix of tests that are done before the interview stage, so tests like the NSAA or the ENGAA, and some that are done when you're there, which tend to be for the humanities subject, things like modern languages. They'll do the test when you're there for the interview. On the whole, Cambridge tend to interview more people than Oxford, so Cambridge tend to come a slightly lesser weight on the admissions test in terms of filtering people out to the interview. But of course, the interviews, once you get there, are more competitive as a consequence of that. So to have a look at some graphs, because I love looking at graphs in these presentations. What we see here, this is the MAT, the test for maths at Oxford. What you'll see here is there is this extremely strong relationship between performance in the test and your chances of getting an interview and then subsequently an offer. No one gets an offer without an interview. And so what you'll see here is your chance of getting an interview don't hit 50-50 until you're getting about 67-68% on that particular test. Your chance of getting an interview at all are stuck around 10, maybe 15% in the high 40s and low 50s. But once you are progressing higher up the scale, getting into the high 70s, the 80s, you are rapidly approaching the point where pretty much everyone is getting interviewed. And you'll see then similarly, the rate at which people are getting offers within that context also go up. So what you've sort of got here is you've got sort of three nested bell curves with an asymptotic limit at the far end. I didn't do maths, but I do know some of the words, so I hope you're all very impressed by that. And if I was wrong, please don't correct me. I've got a horrible feeling I was. We see a similar pattern for the TSA. The TSA is the test for students who are applying to study PPE at Oxford. And what we see here is we see a much, an even tighter sort of bell curve shape here, with a real clustering of students between about 55 and 65. You know, I would think, looking at that, well over 1,000 students within that band. And this is what I meant when I spoke earlier about the level of competition and the level of candidate quality, because what we see here is that there are a lot of students all bunched together in the middle for PPE, which is a really competitive course. And so what we're seeing is not there are huge numbers of students getting really brilliant scores, but that there are a lot of students stuck in the middle. You know, something like 1,000 students who are all doing fine, and some of them are getting interviewed, but not very many of them are getting places, but that they are all really bunched together. It's a much tighter, much less smooth graph than the one we see for maths. This is for the problem-solving section, which is to say the mathsy bit of the TSA. But we see very much the same sort of pattern with the wordsy bit, the critical thinking section. Again, a lot of students all scrunched together in that middle where even getting a couple of extra answers right is going to be vaulting you over 100, 200, 300 students all in one go, which is kind of the point we're going to be talking about in a second, not to provide any spoilers. It's also interesting to note that we see the same pattern even in tests that are essay-based rather than multiple choice. So if we look at the information for the ELAT, the test for students applying for English at Oxford and Cambridge, what we see is that although the students are divided into bands based on their score, we see a fairly familiar sort of bell curve shape in terms of the ELAT score, with a fair bit of bunching in the middle where you'll have 50 or 60 or 70 students all compressed within a single grade boundary, and that the correlation between the performance in that test and the outcomes for those students is still really strong. We're seeing again that the average applicant is scoring a few marks behind the average interviewee, and that the gap between the average interviewee and the average offer holder is quite small, but that it's still statistically meaningful. And also, as we noticed there, that gap, although it doesn't represent very many marks, it does represent a lot of people. That is probably 170, 180 people in those two columns between interview and offer holder. And that's only 2 marks, which is not a lot of marks. That's hopefully something you can overcome in terms of difficulty. Which brings us to the question of test strategy. What should your strategy be? So the way I like to represent this is, again, through some more graphs, because I just love graphs. Here we have the Bmat, which is the admissions tests for medicine. And what we see is the average applicant to Oxford scores 4.5 on the average person who sits the Bmat, scores 4.5. The average person who applies to Oxford scores 4.8. And the average person who gets into Oxford scores about 5.4. Now, this is data for UK applicants. The scores for international applicants, particularly for Oxford, tend to be much higher. You will normally need over a 6, normally a 6.5, 6.8 to be really competitive for medicine at Oxford as an international student. We will talk a little bit about this, I expect, in the Q&A, but it's just something to be aware of, that these numbers unfortunately don't track for non-UK applicants. Now, the nice thing about the Bmat is, although it uses these slightly eccentric scaled scores, we can do a little bit of maths here and be a little bit cheeky, which is, we know that the Bmat has 32 questions. And what we see here is we have, I think, 30 columns. Now, because it's a multiple choice test, it is very difficult to get 0. You can try, but it's really hard. Because even just guessing, if you just put A as the answer for every question, you would still expect to get a fair few right, because sometimes the answer is A. So we can, instead of using these slightly awkward scores, which I don't like, we can think of the Bmat as a traditional test where we're just looking at scores out of 32. And what we see is that a very small number of very unlucky people are scoring substantially worse than you would expect if they were just guessing, which is really unfortunate in its own way. I think there should be some kind of bottom line where you're not actually allowed to score worse than random, because that's dreadfully unlucky to happen to someone. What we see is down here below 1% of candidates, there are a handful of people who are scoring worse than you would expect if they were to just guess. We hit our median score, which, if we remember from the previous slide, was 4.5. So we can see that pings over to being 16, 17 out of 32. That's our median score for everyone sitting the test. We then jump up a couple of steps, and that gives us our Oxford applicant, who's getting 19 out of 20. And then we jump up 3 more to get our average Oxford offer holder, who's getting that 22 out of 32. Now, what I think is really interesting here is that if you look at the y-axis, looking at these percentage of candidates, in this section, we're interested in this section with our 3 colored columns. Each of those correct answers is vaulting you over at least 5% of people. So if you imagine the something in the order of 1,000 people applying for Oxford Medicine. You imagine them all standing in a row from highest score to lowest score. A particularly easy to think of metaphor this week, I suppose, after we saw that enormous queue on television. That one extra answer, you are overtaking 50, 60, 70 people in that queue. That next correct answer, another 50 or 60 or 70. You know, each of those additional correct answers is bumping you up the ranking a really substantial amount. And that doesn't just mean, you know, absolutely nailing the answer, having a really good grasp of the material. It can also be down to things like test strategy. Because what we know is that because this is a multiple choice test, the important thing isn't to make sure that you get every single answer right. It's to make sure that you get all of the answers you know right, but you have a really good shot with all of the answers you don't know. So if we're thinking about, you know, the test strategy of this, I would say the first thing to bear in mind is every question is worth the same number of marks. You don't want to put yourself in the position that you have spent a ton of time on question 3 and you get to question 32, and question 32 is easier, but you mess it up because you're in a hurry, because you're running out of time. What you want to do is make sure that you are hitting time throughout the test, that you are getting through all of the questions and getting to the end to make sure that you aren't leaving behind any easy marks. It's entirely possible that the best question for you in the entire test will be the last one. You don't want to be in the position where you get that one wrong because you haven't had time, or you don't even get there. Because if that was a question you could have answered in 10 seconds flat, if you would have known the answer before you even started looking at the options, you know, if that question had been at the beginning, that would have been hugely helpful to you. You don't want to be in a position where you're disadvantaged by the question order, which is why pace is so important. You want to make sure that you'll give every question enough time to answer it, but not more. If you're running out of time, if you're spending too long on a question, narrow down the options and move on to the next one. This is also where it comes to question of building your confidence. The Bmat is quite a time-pressured exam that will go for a lot of these admissions tests. To the you can, I always recommend trying to get as many answers on the board early on. If you're finding a question difficult, you can put down a good guess and go on to the next one. You may have time to come back to them and see if you can improve on those guesses, but the important thing is to get to the questions you can work out, you can do quickly, because tests like these are surprisingly emotional. If you are finding things difficult, if your brain is sort of really crunching, if you're not enjoying yourself, you will find questions that you normally find easy hard. You'll lose confidence, you'll slow down, you'll start having negative thoughts creeping in. Making sure that you are getting answers, that you're going through the test, and as you get further in, you're thinking, oh, this isn't so bad. Oh, I know that answer, I know that answer. I feel like I've already got some points on the board. Particularly for the numerical questions, it makes an enormous difference to your performance if you are feeling confident and relaxed and happy. Another step towards this is making sure that you control the environment you're in. In an ideal world, the only thing that should be a surprise in these tests is the questions. Make sure you know where in your school you're doing it. You know, pick out whatever you're going to wear. Make sure you've had a shower. All of the little things that can feel happy and relaxed and ready. I know that it varies for different people as to what works for them, but my general advice is to get to a point where you open up the question paper, you're in a room that you were expecting, you're sitting where you were expecting, you're wearing the clothes you were expecting, you got to school on time to do the test. All of those things are just normal and boring, and so the only interesting thing is the test. Nothing else challenging or worthwhile is happening. It's also a question of targeting your revision. This is something that I am particularly hot on as a kind of approach. What I recommend doing during your revision is, as you go through the test, make a note of which questions you think you've got wrong. Just make a little note, put the question number down, and then when you come to mark, you want to know not just which questions you got right, but which questions you got right and knew you got right, and which questions wrong and knew you got wrong. The questions you got wrong and you knew you got wrong those should be your first port of call for further studying. But the next thing to look at are the questions that you thought you got right, but you got wrong. Because the danger is that you won't know what mistakes you're making, and those are so important to look at. If you know you're not good at a type of question, you can skip it, you can put a guess down, you can move on. If you think you're good at something, but you are in fact bad at something, you may find yourself spending longer on it. You may end up employing an incorrect strategy, and it might lead to you making a similar mistake later on in the exam because you don't know that you're doing it wrong. So targeting targeting what you know you don't know is really important. And it also helps to know what you do know, because it means you don't have to go back and study that stuff again. You know, if you are absolutely hot stuff at some of the questions, that's fine. You can leave them be and focus on the rest. You know, you don't want to be doing a whole past paper after a whole past paper after a whole past paper. You want to be focusing your revision on the areas that you can improve on. And the areas you can improve on aren't going to be the ones that you find easy. They can be the ones you find hard, or the ones that you think are easy, but actually you're mistaken. Other things to think about. It's very fashionable these days. Think about a little bit of self-care. Try not to revise the night before. It doesn't generally help. It's unusual for you to be able to squeeze something in at the very last minute. I recommend going and doing something else, something totally unrelated. Go rock climbing or bowling, or go for a run, or like play loads of Minecraft. I don't know what young people do. Whatever it is you enjoy doing, go and do some of that. Give your brain a break, let it relax, and work out another part of another part of the brain. Also, these tests tend to be in the morning. If you are not a morning person like me, be prepared for that. Make sure that you have got a lot of sleep beforehand. Even if all you're doing is going to bed and lying in bed, tossing and turning, make sure that you are adapting for that. I was never got on well with exams first thing in the morning. It takes me several hours to wake up and actually hit functioning brain. And so I'm sure any of these tests I would do better in the afternoon than I would in the morning, but often they're in the morning, you don't have a choice. So, you know, try and adapt to that. Depending on whether you have to go back to school or not after the exam, I recommend rewarding yourself. Do something you enjoy doing. Probably that isn't school, so you may not have the opportunity, but if you do that. Have a nap. This is another one of the strategies I've always liked to employ, which is after a test or a job interview or anything like that, I have a nap. The reason for this is then when I wake up, it feels like it was a dream. And I find it much less stressful if I can't really remember what happened, and it feels kind of strange and unreal. This may not work for you, but it's an idea out there. I would also recommend, and this is another one that's perhaps particular to me, if you don't do well on the test, if you don't get the job, if you don't get through on the interview, you will be disappointed. There's no need for you to be disappointed in advance. You don't need to come out and go, oh, that was terrible. I did really badly. I'm really worried. It's awful. Worry about that when you get the result. In the meantime, try out being overconfident. Come out and go, actually, I got 100% on that test. I was brilliant. See if it works for you. My experience is you'll be disappointed. You'll be more than disappointed enough if you don't succeed. So you may as well pretend you succeeded in the meantime. And of course, the most important thing with any advice, if you don't like any of this advice, don't do it. Advice is something that we think of as being very valuable, and yet we give away for free. So if any of these ideas don't work for you, don't do them. Try the opposite. These are based on my experiences, things that I've learned from working with students, from my own challenges with exams and things like that. If it works for you, then do it. If it doesn't work, come up with something else. You know, it's your life. I'm not going to teach you how to live it. So, sort of to wrap things up, what we know is moving from the 59th to the 66th percentile in these tests, getting 1 or 2 extra right answers, improving the quality of your guess on 4 or 5 questions is kind of the same as getting an extra right answer in a multiple choice test. That kind of improvement can even double your chance of being invited to interview for certain subjects. That can vault you ahead of 100, 200 other students who are applying. simply by virtue of you having a better exam strategy and being a little bit smarter about the whole thing. It's also worth remembering that the admissions tests are, as ever, the only like-for-like comparison the universities have to work with. The students will be coming from different exam systems. They'll be coming from different A-level choices. They'll be coming from different countries. There's no straightforward way of comparing someone who's been doing the French bac to someone who's been doing the Scottish hires. Tests are the one thing that everyone who is applying will have done that is the same. And so you want to make sure that's a strength, so that when they're looking at the thing that is the objective measure, you are good on the objective measure. And last of all, personal statements, they're due in I think 3 weeks now. An hour spent on these tests is so much more valuable than updating your personal statement. I would be really tempted at the end of this month, just to put this personal statement away in a box, maybe even put it into the UCAS form on the website and be done with it. You're probably not going to change it enough to make a really big difference now. You want to switch your focus to the things that you really can change, and that isn't the personal statement. Fun as it is to edit them, and I do love doing that, I would say the sooner you can get that done, the better. Now, I hope that's been helpful. If it hasn't, then just do the opposite of what I said. That might also be good advice. Who can say? But we do have other ways in which we can help, not just these PowerPoint presentations. So Rowan, tell the good people about how we can help while I rest my voice after talking without stopping for 30 minutes.
Oh, boo-hoo. So the way that we help, we actually help students is, I did say a little bit earlier about a program. So the program is actually what everyone goes through. It's like a rigorous structured curriculum that we take students through. And it's split into 4 main parts, as you can see here on the screen. So if we just go over to the next slide. So the first thing that comes up is obviously one thing most people come to us for is the one-to-one tuitioning. So these are with expert tutors from a range of different backgrounds, that all of them have actually scored in the top 10% of their tests nationally for their particular, obviously, area that they're going into or are into. So these people have obviously helped other students as well get through it. They've been through the same process as you're going through at the moment. Obviously, this whole panic and getting ready for everything. They've been through that. They can help with any part that you need to obviously go through. And then if we go over to the next slide as well, just to make sure I'm putting them in order. So another thing we have here, so this is I believe it's a report for a medical, obviously this mock medical interview. So you'll get feedback, obviously through all of this as well. So you know where you should be focusing and where you can improve. It's one thing that happens to a lot of students, or to everyone really, is when they start getting ready for things, they end up getting better, just as everyone does. And then they end up hitting this plateau where everything sort of evens out, and then having these tutors and people telling you where you should be focusing on helps you get off of that plateau and starts really getting you past, increasing your test results and really getting you past the other people, like the more average scores, and really get, obviously 1 or 2 extra scores can make all the difference with your application.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is also, from a kind of logistical standpoint, such an important part of the process, because while I've not been a teenager for a little while now, I was not especially communicative with my parents. And the nice thing about these reports is they do get sent to both student and parent. So if you're a parent watching or listening, and you sometimes find it hard to get an answer out of your child as to what they've been doing, this way you do get to find out rather than relying on them. I think I would have just stormed upstairs and gone, "Oh, it's fine. Leave me alone." I think teenagers are much nicer than they used to be. But if your teenager is difficult like me, then you'll find this sort of thing really helpful. But carry on, Rowan. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I feel like this has been very personal today for me.
No, it's totally fine. It's no hiding report cards or anything. So if we just pass over to the next slide. So the second part that we have is obviously resources. So these are all videos, books, all made by our tutors. There are also past papers and lots of practice questions as well from a huge bank of different ones that you get access through a thing called the preparation portal. And that's how you'll access everything that's in the portal apart from the tutoring, and that you'll be in contact with them anyway. So these resources, there are loads. It's very extensive rather, with talking about all sorts of different areas of each part of the application and helping you, obviously, all of your knowledge coming together and everything like that. So if we just go over to the next one. So the third thing is the enrichment seminars. So these actually happen every Sunday. These talk about a variety of different topics. There's medical, humanities, STEM, and what's the last one again?
I think, is it economics, maybe?
Yes. But
I'm not sure. We'll have to check.
Yes. So with these, the different seminars, it is economics, and there's one for law as well. So these are obviously based off of all the sort of different subjects that we help with, and they cover loads of different things. They're essentially university level lectures. They're all live, although they do get recorded. So if there's any particular ones that have already happened, you can actually go and watch those. There are handouts for pre and further reading you can access as well. So there's a lot that's involved with these seminars, and they are very useful to obviously bring everything together as well. And speaking of bringing everything together is the intensive courses as well, which is the last slide. So these intensive courses do consolidate everything together. So these are things like mock interviews and the mock tests. A lot of them are happening around about this time, actually, for I know some are taking place this weekend, and some for next weekend as well. So a lot of these will be obviously like 4 mock tests in a day, which can obviously sound very daunting, but with that, obviously you get all the grading back and really just make sure that you can put everything together and make sure you can really handle those exam conditions. And with the interview one as well, which is particularly one of my favorites, is because you get 4 different mock interviews with different tutors. So you get used to lots of different interviewing styles as well, because it's all well and good having loads of mock interviews with someone, but you end up getting diminishing returns. And then being able to do it with different tutors, you get used to lots of different styles and lots of different questions. And that's something that we actually talked about last week on the open days as well.
Absolutely. Certainly my experience is that if you've only doing the mock interview with someone you trust, a favorite teacher at school, that isn't going to be scary enough. The real thing is going to be a little bit scary, a little bit nerve-wracking. It isn't going to be someone you know. And so practicing with a variety of people who have a variety of styles is really valuable, because what you want to do is to make the silly mistakes early on during your practice so that you're ready when you get to the real thing. And I'm sure be talking about this in the coming weeks and months when we focus more on interviews. But the easiest mistake to make in the interview is to say something silly because you panic. And the reason you panic is because you're not prepared. And so that proper preparation makes a really huge difference. The good news is all this does seem to work. We're really proud of our success rates, which are well in excess of the national average. We're hopefully on course for our 500th offer later this year, which is a really exciting landmark for us as a business. Hopefully Rohan's going to put on like a prize for everyone. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Wouldn't we all enjoy a lovely prize? And we're particularly proud of our success rates when it comes to medicine as well. These all compare really flatteringly with some of the fancier schools in this country. We don't quite have the outfits of Eton or Westminster, but we do have results that are really comparable with them, which is something we're really proud of. Now that sort of brings us to the end of the bit with the slides. All that's left for me to say is, do you have any questions? And we'll take some questions. What I will say though is, if you have questions that are very individual to you, very particular and personal, to do with your circumstances, your subject choice, things like this, please do get in touch directly by booking a consultation. There's a little animation running now, hopefully, showing you how to do that. And that will give us the best chance to answer your questions personally. We'll answer as many questions as we can here, but it may be that your question is a little too specific, and so we'll have to wait until we speak to you directly to really get the hang of what we can do to help. Let's have a look. So we have a question about Cambridge and the Bmat. So I don't have the same graph available for Cambridge in this presentation, but we see very similar patterns across all the universities. If you think back to that graph, what you're seeing there is a fairly traditional bell curve, and all that really changes is where the people are getting one extra correct answer or one fewer correct answers. So that data goes for Oxford, for UCL. It's really remarkably consistent because, of course, a lot of the time the students applying are the same people. So most of the students who are applying for medicine at Oxford are also applying for medicine at UCL. And so the variation between universities is fairly small because the crossover in the sample is quite large. We had a question about the TMUA. Yes, in an earlier version of this presentation, we did have more graphs, and to be honest, I cut them down because they all look the same. We still see the same basic set of shapes of students clustering the middle, particularly on the MCQ ones. We have a few other questions.
For Anne,
yes, go ahead, Rowan.
Sorry, for Anne, just with the Oxford law, to do the LNAT before you send off the UCAS application, the deadline for the LNAT is the 15th of October. So generally, you do need to get the test secured. So you'll send off your UCAS will need to be sent off before you actually have the deadline for the LNAT to be booked. So you will need to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Rowan. It's worth making sure again that you've got that in. You've got a sensible date. That's the booking, isn't it? You don't have to do the test first, do you?
No. So you need to book it by the 15th.
Oh, that's all right then. So if you had to do both at the same time, that would be a bit panicky. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of questions about the TMUA. Do you have any? Have a quick look at while you've got the portal open, Rowan, how many questions we've got available for the TMUA and what our resources are like on that for maths and computer science.
Yes, so for maths, we do have quite a lot. For example, on our practice questions, we've got 332 practice standard maths questions. There's 179 for the advanced math questions. So there is quite a lot that is involved on there, and we do provide support with the TMUA. So we do have support. There are lots of resources on that as well. So we do provide support with all of that.
Fab. That is a lot of questions. 179.
We also have loads of past papers as well from 2021 all the way back to 2016. So we've got lots of past papers, practice questions, and all sorts for you as well.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had I don't think we've ever had any problems with students running out of questions, but you can absolutely try.
Yeah, try.
Anne asked about booking the LNAT. Again, that's one to have a look at, have a chat with Pearson, I think it is, who administers that, and make sure that you can pick out the best date for you in terms of sitting the test. But you do have a few options with the LNAT, so it is more flexible than some of the others. But that's one for you to figure out with the test provider. Do we have the data for the part 2 of the Bmat? Again, we do have the data. I haven't put it in because it looks the same as for part 1. The section 2 curve is a little bit flatter, but to be honest, you would struggle to see the difference looking at the two of them. Again, I could do a version of this presentation that is just 70 graphs, but unfortunately it only looks like 9 graphs because they are very repetitive. But I think most of those should be somewhere on the website, and we should have article write-ups of all of these data sets. So if you have a poke around, they should be there somewhere. But as I say, for the sake of brevity, we don't put them all in because it gets boring. Yi asks us a question about retakes and medicine. So this is a really good example of a chance to speak to us directly. There are several questions I already want to ask you to follow up to kind of better understand your circumstances. So please do get in touch with us directly and we'll see what we can do. But it's the kind of question that's going to take some research. I'm going to have to look some things up. I'm going to have to ask some colleagues for advice. Rowan's going to have to do the same. And so I don't want to give you a mediocre answer here because I'm in a rush. I mean, says, yes, we have heard, yeah, for international students, there does tend to be a very high threshold for the Bmat score. But for UK students, it is that bit lower. We haven't really had much in the way of questions about this. But this is because there is a very hard cap put in place by the government on the number of non-UK nationals who are trained at UK medical schools, because they're very popular. They end up being very competitive. And so you will have hundreds of people applying for 8 places to study medicine at Oxford. And that just means that the bar is set really high, which is unfortunate for those students, but again, it's not something that we have anything we can really do with. Maria asks about sort of interview prep, and we've got a couple of other questions about preparing, what kind of preparation should we be doing at this point? So I would say the first thing is if you've got a test coming up, to be focusing on that test, doing the things we've talked about, making sure that you are targeting your revision on the areas you're getting wrong, making sure you're targeting the areas that you think you're getting right, particularly to make sure that you're not making silly mistakes or misunderstanding how things work, but also to start getting that interview prep, beginning that, look through past interview questions, practicing expressing yourself orally, practicing talking about the books you've mentioned in your personal statement, arranging mock interviews with either with us or doing that with your school, just really practicing, not just writing it down, not just problem solving, but doing it, out loud, confidently, finding out what it is about that you find hard. Because if you don't prepare, particularly just the oral expression of your ideas, being able to do it clearly and in a structured way, which I feel like I'm struggling at this very moment, it's not something you can learn overnight. So it's something you need to be practicing in advance. I think that's probably all we have time for today. There are a few other questions, but these are all, when it comes to questions about, you please come to them, go to them directly. Same for the Bmat consortium, speaking to Cambridge admissions assessments. And please do get in touch with us directly about your circumstances, and we'll see what we can do to help. Is there anything that you wanted to talk today that we've missed, Rowan?
No, I personally believe everything is very concise. So
fab. All right then. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week to hopefully finish your personal statements and move forward from there. So have a lovely weekend, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Have a good one now. Bye.